Greetings! On the 11th of August 1999 there was a solar eclipse in the UK. The day before, I got my standard grade exam results. Now, standard grades are the exams you do at the end of 4th year, so when you're about 15, 16 years old, I was 16. I remember it was the day before because I remember bumping into a teacher in the afternoon after the eclipse, and we talked about the eclipse and we talked about my exam results, and quite frankly I think she was as shocked as anyone that I actually had done okay. I mean, I was never terribly academic in high school, but I did probably better than anybody thought. Now, when the actual eclipse was happening, I was on the phone talking to my parents because they were off on holiday. They were down in Suffolk at the time. So, given that they were down in Suffolk for the eclipse, the likelihood of them coming back home that Saturday, I don't think my dad would have wanted to have done that drive. I think it would have been the following Saturday that they came home. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because when they came home, they had a present for me. They were like, bravo, you did okay at your exam results. And their present was the first Tomb Raider. So I think that today, when I put this video up, the 21st of August, is my own personal 20th anniversary. So I thought I'd ramble about Tomb Raider. Now, in order to fit this many games into a reasonably lengthy video, or perhaps 2 videos, my internet speed sucks, I'm going to have to go through them reasonably quickly, maybe about 5 minutes to each game, maybe? So, and this is completely off the cuff. This is not about, factual stuff. This is about memories. This is about, my feelings towards them. But I have so many strong memories of that playing that game for the first time. I remember my dad handing it to me and I just looked at it and I was like, that's her from the Lucozade adverts. But I remember taking it upstairs and putting it into the PlayStation for the first time and playing the caves. And I had not owned a PlayStation for very long at this point. I had just got it the Christmas before. Even back then I was late to the party on everything. I'd played some of my friends' PlayStation games, but I'd only recently owned, up to this point I only owned Final Fantasy VII and Crash Bandicoot 2. Final Fantasy VII does have some cool 3D stuff in the battle. Crash Bandicoot 2 has, it is kind of 3D, but it's on its terms. Tomb Raider was the first game I remember playing where it was a fully 3D environment that you could move around in, that you could interact with the way you can, and it blew my mind. And I remember so clearly playing the caves and just running. I mean, the caves compared to the stuff that's in Tomb Raider later on and then in later games, it's quite simplistic, but just running around those areas, just trying to get a feel for the game, I mean, it was amazing. I remember not knowing that you could pull the lever to open the door, so I was running around for ages, but that helped me to sort of acclimatise to the game. But there was so many moments in that game where it was just like, holy shit, I mean, like, how can this game keep getting better? Like the T-Rex charging out of the darkness scared the shit out of me. Playing St. Francis Folly for the first time and just constantly falling to my death because I still hadn't quite... it's quite a natural thing if you've been playing Tomb Raider for a long time to just be very quick on that walk button, but back then I still wasn't, so I plunged to my death a lot. I remember this was a time when games moved a lot more slowly, and I don't mean the actual games themselves, I mean how I played them. It might be partly my age, it might be partly the time in which I was playing it. If you get stuck on something now, you look up a walkthrough, you just Google something. I was at Palace Midas by Christmas. That's how slowly I was progressing through this game. And I remember spending the Christmas holidays just trying to work my way through Palace Midas, because that was honestly the biggest thing I had ever encountered, the biggest level I had ever encountered in a game to that point. And when kids play like the old Tomb Raider games now, they probably look at them and think this is tiny, like in terms of the scale of games now, this is tiny. But that was the biggest thing I'd ever encountered in a game up until that point. The size of Palace Midas. And then when... but I don't think the scale hit me because it's lots of rooms. You know, and some of these rooms are on top of each other. So it's, you know, it's... I think the scale is more when you sort of stop and think about it, and you think about the amount of places that you can go to and the amount of nooks and crannies and little spaces that you can explore. It was really with the Cistern, when I stepped out into that huge room in the Cistern for the first time, the Tomb Raider theme kicked in. I just thought, oh, I'm playing a brilliant game. And then when we got the FMV at the end of the Egypt stuff, there's a bit when that guy takes the ski on off of her and then chucks her against a rock, and she just looks up like she's like, I'm gonna fucking kill you for that. That was the moment where I was like, yeah, I think I'm on board with this character now. Because this was a brilliant time when, you know, and it was a great time to be a teenage young woman, because we had Lara Croft, and then in TV we had Captain Janeway, we had Xena, we had Scully, we had Buffy. You know, there was all these, you know, women in entertainment who were just like, nah bitches, you're not fucking with me. And that was a great thing to see. I mean, I don't know if I was looking in the wrong places, but in the 2000s it seemed to just all go to shit, and, you know, had a lot of crappy female representation again. Maybe I just I wasn't watching the right shows during that time. But yeah, I mean, so many strong memories of just been blown away by this. I mean, it's very rare, and I think it's becoming rarer actually, to experience a game that just so fundamentally alters your perception of what games can be. And Tomb Raider was one of them. I mean, whenever I played 3D action adventure games after playing the first Tomb Raider, it was always like, yeah, this is just kind of imitating Tomb Raider, isn't it? You know, and it's not to say that some of those games couldn't still be inventive and bring really interesting ideas to the table, but, you know, it's that first game that you experience that always sets the standard for everything that comes afterwards. I think it was probably when my parents went on holiday the following summer that they were like, do you want us to bring you anything back? And I was like, see, if you see another Tomb Raider game, I wouldn't say no to that. And they actually came back with 2 and 3. So I played 2 and 3, like sort of going back and forth between the two of them, which probably wasn't the best way to play them. I probably should have just played 2 and then played 3, but you know when you're excited about something. So, actually, do you know something? Just pause for a moment. Tomb Raider 1, favourite level. I mean, I think it would be a toss of the coin between Palace Midas and the Cistern, because both of them had such a huge impact on me the first time I was playing, and really just, you know, sort of made me realise I was playing a great game, and that there was a lot of, you know, like, it was fun to explore. You know, Tomb Raider was kind of the game that started to teach me it's fun to actually have a look around and explore stuff in games. I would say that the Greece section is my favourite section of the game. I would argue that maybe it goes on a bit too long. I think one of the things that Anniversary did well was to condense down the Cistern and Tomb into the sort of key components, because I've just recently replayed both of those levels. I'm currently replaying the first game, and you know, there's a lot of stuff in Tomb that I think is just like, this is a bit sort of dull and pointless. I think that Lara could drop, you know, that big long drop at the end of the Cistern, I think she could drop down that and then fall into that pool of water outside of the tomb, and you wouldn't have really lost anything. You know, there's a lot of Tomb in the level that, I mean, it's not bad exactly, it's just kind of, it feels a bit kind of meh, you know, like compared to some of the stuff that's in the Greece levels, it's kind of like, nah. Right, okay, so, Greece is my favourite section. I would say that Egypt, I have a couple of days ago replayed the first Egypt level. I always get mixed up. Which one's Temple of Khamun and which one's the Obelisk of Khamun? Whichever one comes first, Temple, I think. I've just replayed that, and there's a lot of stuff in it that's quite iconic imagery. You know, it's like, oh, there's that room with all those rows of statues, and you know, there's that Sphinx that Toby Gard didn't like, so he made another one for the next level that was like 3 times the size or something. I mean, it's literally almost as tall as they could make a level, like the height of a level at that time. Yeah, there's all these little like places and rooms that you're just, the cat statue. But overall, I think Egypt's my least favourite. It's not bad. It's just of the 4 sections. I mean, you could argue Peru is the weakest because it's the one it's got the kid gloves on because it's teaching you how to play the game. But there's so much fond memories attached to that from experiencing this game for the first time. So I'd say Greece, then Atlantis, then Peru, then Egypt. But you know something? See, if Egypt's the worst that this game's got to offer, then this game's bloody amazing. Because, Egypt's still fantastic. It's got a lot of great stuff in. So, Tomb Raider 2. I think that Tomb Raiders 1 and 2 complement each other quite nicely. They are the same in some ways and they are very different in other ways. Tomb Raider 2 has more of a focus on combat, which is not necessarily a good thing all of the time, because it is a bunch of guys running around in circles, shooting their guns upwards, and yet somehow still hitting Lara. Yeah, the whole shooty situation is a bit off, but that's not to say that it isn't fun or enjoyable at times, if you've got a nice wide open area, because there are plenty of bullshitty moments in Tomb Raider 2 where it's like, how do I actually avoid this guy, or how do I, get into a tactically sound position, or just take a tactic that will actually allow me to defeat this person. So, sometimes it does get a bit difficult, but there were so many improvements as well. It's hard not to, as much as I love the first game, it's hard not to feel like it's very boxed in, because you're always underground or you're always in a cave somewhere, whereas, Tomb Raider 2 had skylines and, there was a lot of outdoor locations, and that in itself was actually really quite nice. I'm not a fan of the modern levels, but, and I actually am not particularly keen. I know a lot of people love the Venice levels. I'm not particularly keen on them, but just being outdoors, or having something like the Great Wall level that starts outdoors and then you progressively move inward. That was what a lovely change, to just not be out indoors all the time or underground all the time. That sometimes you could be outside. One of the things that did strike me the last time I played the game quite recently, just at the end of last year, and one of the things that did strike me is that there is a more of a narrative flow, because as much as I don't like the modern levels, you can play the game and realise, there is a reason why she goes to Venice, because the information on the bad guy's laptop leads her there. There's a reason why she ends up on the offshore rig, because, the bad guys knock her unconscious and, take her prisoner there. So there is a reason why she goes to these locations. So that doesn't really, unlike Tomb Raider 3, where it's just picking a location on a map and then boom, you're there. There is reasons for it, and there is a kind of narrative flow. And I do love the locations in this game. I mean, the Great Wall of China. I mean, it's a really cool idea to take because, I mean, did the first game... I mean, they sort of did casually use some real world locations, like Vilcabamba's an actual place, the idea of Egyptian tombs or Egyptian pyramids and Sphinx and all that kind of stuff. But it does go bonkers at one point, whereas I like that Tomb Raider 2 uses an actual real world location like the Great Wall of China, but then says, but there's more to this place than you know, but Lara's going to figure it out. That first level with the Great Wall, I remember it being insane. Like, there is some insanely difficult moments for, like, I talked about how the caves is quite basic for a first level, but the Great Wall is not dicking around, is it? There's some really difficult moments, and that's basically the game saying, haha, you haven't even seen anything yet, bitches. Just you wait till you get to the Temple of Zion properly. um, but you know, there's a lot of lovely locations. I mean, I don't really like Venice, but you know, the idea of being in the canals of Venice is really cool. The wreck of the Maria de Ria being underwater and in a ship upside down is really cool. And then Tibet, I love Tibet. I love the Barkhan Monastery. It's just such beautiful visuals for a game that has a lot of you're looking at a lot of white walls in Venice, you're looking at a lot of grey walls in the offshore rig, you know, you're looking at lots of drab blues and greens and, you know, like sort of drab colours in the Maria de Ria. And then the first the Tibetan foothills level, you know, again it's lots of, you know, like sort of murky, grey, yellowish rocks. And then you get to Barkang Monastery and there's all these colours and all these variations, and then you get to the Temple of Zion and it's like sort of solid reds and greens of the floating islands. So there's a lot of really nice colours, particularly in the later levels of the game. I would say Barkang Monastery is probably my favourite level for that reason, with the Temple of Zion being a close second. The Temple of Zion's got some crazy stuff in it in terms of, and also floating islands in terms of just the location, I beg your pardon, in terms of the kind of traps and the kind of puzzles that you have to do. There's some crazy stuff, so I love that. I'd say least favourite probably Venice, just because it's, you know, it's a modern setting. It's it doesn't really intrigue me, or you know, there's some fun stuff with the boats, you know, like the timed puzzle with the boat. But there's a lot of stuff in Venice that's just kind of like, nah, I'd rather be dodging traps in a tomb somewhere. So I'm less keen on that. Whenever I get to Venice, there's always a sense of I need to get this out of the way to get to the good stuff. Tomb Raider 3. So, I mean, I have played this game more recently and done a review on it. So, you know, if you follow my videos regularly, you know my opinions on Tomb Raider 3, or rather my very divided opinions on Tomb Raider 3, because it does some things really well. You know, graphically it's fantastic. I mean, Tomb Raiders 1 and 2 were okay for their time, but you could see a very obvious jump, or well, maybe actually it's a casual, a natural progression. Tomb Raider 1's very boxed in, Tomb Raider 2 opens things up, and then Tomb Raider 3 is where things really start to feel alive. I mean, partly that's to do with the graphics, because like I said in my review, things start to look like what they're actually meant to look like, rather than just a bunch of pixels. So, you know, like the fire actually looks like fire. You see ripples in the water. If Lara gets nibbled by piranhas, you see blood flowing through the water. So things start to actually feel like the things that they're meant to. But it's also in the sound. I love the soundscape in a lot of sound. Actually, what I'm realizing, you know, now that I've got a bit more of a critical eye with games than I did as a teenager. The core design were absolutely brilliant at the soundscape of their games and really constructing a game with audio. And it is actually one of the things that I think allows older games to still remain impactful. If you've got a great soundtrack, especially when it comes to sound effects and ambience, then you can still have that be really powerful. And if you think about something like the jungle, you can't literally show all the insects and the little bugs buzzing around back in those days, but you absolutely believe that they're there because of the sounds. And that ends up making it really powerful. And then of course there's the music, which doesn't feel like a piece of music is now playing. It feels like the music is an integrated part of the game, and I think that the music, the sound effects and the graphics all work together to bring these environments to life. But then I also have the problem of the level design. I really do not like the level design in Tomb Raider 3, because no, there are some good levels in this game, I won't deny it, but there are also a lot of meandering levels. There are a lot of levels where it's not terribly clear where you're meant to go or what you're meant to do. You know, something like Palace Midas in the first game feels overwhelming at first, but there's a fun to exploring it, and as you explore it, you know, you undo it bit by bit. Whereas, you know, like if you think about the underground, is it Lud's Gate, the levels, I can't remember which one's which, but the one in the underground where everything looks the same. You know, you go down one corridor that's got an escalator in, you come out of that, you can go down another corridor that's got an escalator. You know, all the walls look the same, all the everything just feels the same, and I get confused, and I don't know where I'm meant to be going, and I don't know what I'm meant to be doing, and that really frustrates me. I don't mind a challenge, but when I'm just running around and I can't even begin to figure out how the level is meant to be, you know, like you play around in Palace Midas for a while, you start to figure it out. Whereas some of those London Underground levels just felt like, and even the bit with the underwater, with the underwater swim thing, you know, it's like you're in this underwater bit with all these tunnels, and then you move into another underwater bit with all these tunnels, and it looks the same. And of course also the problem is that it's got lots of different locations, as you would expect most Tomb Raider games to have, but unlike something like Chronicles, where I think they tie it together quite nicely by starting in the past, coming back into the present, and then moving into the past again. So you can move from location to location to different parts of Lara's timeline. Tomb Raider 3 is just a case of pick a location on a map and then boom, you're there. You know, it just feels like, I mean, obviously all of the locations in any Tomb Raider game is because the developers have been like, oh, do you know, somewhere in China would be awesome, somewhere in Venice would be awesome, but as I said, Tomb Raider 2 finds a way of then tying them together so that it doesn't just feel like a bunch of ideas that the developers had, but it actually feels like there's a reason why you go to all these locations, and that's just not there. I mean, it's there in a very vague sense with Tomb Raider 3. You know, like finding the meteorite artifacts, but it's very, very casual. So I've never really liked that aspect of, you know, it's just boom, you're in a new location now. So I do have very mixed feelings about Tomb Raider 3, that it does some things really, really well, other things not so much. In terms of favourites, I would say I think actually the Indian jungle stuff is my favourite. Again, it's because of what it does with the soundscape and the music and like everything. I think this is the first time where you actually really feel, I mean, with the Sistren you sort of had this sort of damp yuckiness, but this is the first time I think you can really imagine. They couldn't literally show the mud on Lara back in those days, but I think you can imagine that by the end of the jungle stuff, Lara's just caked in mud and yucky griminess, and I like that. That's something that I said with Shadow, that I really liked, is that it's just a muddy yuckiness. You know, like instead of it just being the beauty of nature, you know, that kind of stuff actually makes it feel more real, I think. Least favourite, London, definitely. London is incredibly frustrating and annoying and meandering, and just not, I mean, again, my bias of not liking the modern levels as much as the ancient ones, but I do think that there's a lot of questionable level design, and it's so visually the same that I think it just gets quite difficult and confusing. It's my abiding memory of playing Tomb Raider 3 as a teenager. It's just been irritated and frustrated with so much of it in a way that I wasn't with the first two games. So Tomb Raider 4, I actually got Tomb Raider 4 and Chronicles that fall in Christmas of 2000, so I played the first 5 games within about a year and a half, as opposed to the, you know, for 5 years that people who had been playing these games since '96 had done. And I was actually with my mother in the shop when she bought them. It was, you know, it was a case of pretend you don't see this, but I did see it, and I figured out where she was hiding it. So throughout the whole of December, when I came home from school for lunchtime, I'd look out the game and I'd play it for about 20 minutes or so and put it back. So by the time I officially got it at Christmas, I was already past the bit with the truck. What is that? Yeah, because you get the FMV. Is it Temple of Karnak? I think. Yeah, oh God, I loved it so much. I mean, it's not a massive visual progression from Tomb Raider 3, but it's just enough of a nice polish that it looked fantastic, and the locations and the tombs. And I actually, some people don't like the fact that it stayed in the one location. I like that it stayed in Egypt and it immersed itself in Egyptian mythology. It made it more intense and interesting in a way that I don't think any of the other Tomb Raider games had been to that point. The tombs I found incredibly creepy. Incredibly. Like, I've always had this feeling that there's a lot of, there's a lot of shadow, there's a lot of weird lighting in these tombs, and I really get the feeling that, we're being watched. Like, there's something lurking in the shadows, there's something lurking in the corners that I can't quite see, that's always out of sight, and yet it's watching me, or it's watching Lara. And there is some really creepy uses of music in this. This is Nathan McCree did the first 3 games. This is Peter Connolly that does Tomb Raider 4. He does an amazing job with it. There's one bit when you go down a set of stairs, and there's a turn round to the right, but just as you're going down these stairs, some really creepy music kicks in, to the point that it's this feeling of, I don't want to go any further, I don't want to go around that corner, I don't want to see what's there, because obviously the creepy music's coming, something is waiting for me, and there's nothing, but it weirds me out every time I have that moment. And that's incredible for a game to still be able to do that. I tell you, another thing that makes me feel weirded out is Tomb Raider 4, by this point Chronicles was really in love with their 0G camera. In fact, actually, the first time I saw the menu and it wasn't a still image and it was this 0G camera moving about, I mean, oh my god, that was amazing. But they loved to have all these little moments where they were showing you the tomb, but it was this camera moving through the area. And with my media graduate hat on, I can't help but think, yeah, but whose point of view is that camera from? When a camera is moving through an environment, it often feels like, is that a creature? Is that some kind of entity? Is that an Egyptian god that's still lurking about in this tomb that's watching Lara? Like, that's a part of what adds to this feeling of we're being watched, because there's these constant camera movements that feels like you're looking through the eyes of somebody else, and it's not. I mean, I'm sorry, but Core Design were not very good at ever the sort of visual storytelling elements. I'm going to come back to that in the Angel of Darkness review. I'm going to talk about the weird kind of visual storytelling that they do in that game. But, I don't think that they were thinking very hard about these kind of things. I think they were just thinking, wow, this 0G camera is really cool, let's put it in everywhere. And so it adds to this kind of weird feeling. But I love so many things about this game. I love the inclusion of Jean-Yves, because it's like we're finally seeing some kind of hints that Lara has a life outside of the literal tomb raiding that she does. The way she greets Jean-Yves warmly, that she, has a bit of banter with him a couple of times. I really, really like that. Oh, the FMVs are gorgeous. I mean, they are a step up from the previous games, and I remember just looking at these FMVs and thinking, this is the best game graphics we'll ever get. It cannot get better than this, surely. But it was incredibly impressive for its time. Although it's in small screen. Like all the other games before this, I can't remember if Chronicles is, but certainly the 1, 2 and 3, their FMVs were in widescreen. Which means that when you're watching it on a modern screen, it will still go into widescreen, whereas no matter what screen you're looking at Tomb Raider 4 on now, it will always be small screen. That's really annoying, because it's visually, like, the FMVs are gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. In terms of my favourite levels, I love all that, Lost Library and all that kind of stuff. The Lost Library, the way it's sort of, it is sort of pale walls, but then there's all these blue highlights. That is absolutely fantastic. Just beautiful, beautiful. In fact, a lot of the Alexandria section of this game is gorgeous. I love the planetarium. Like all that kind of design that was on the ceilings of the planetarium was just gorgeous. And I love that you're basically doing a block pushing puzzle in that game, but it wasn't a block, it wasn't a big huge massive block that was like a billion times the size of Lara. It was something smaller and more, like, I think, were they globes? It was something more realistic that Lara could actually push. And also, with pushing the blocks in 1 to 3, it was like sort of a very stop and start thing. She'd push it and then stop, and then you'd have to press the forward button again to push it again. Whereas this, you could just press and hold and push it for as long until you let go of the button. So that was really great. Levels that I'm not keen on. I don't like all the Cairo stuff. And again, bias, modern settings, I'll own that, but do you know something? It is basically like 6 levels to find a booster to get your motorbike over a big gap. That's basically what it is, and it feels like padding. This is already a long game. I think this game's like something like 30 levels long, so it's not like it would be too short without it. But it feels like padding. It feels like padding to lengthen the game, and that's not needed. Honestly, if they'd cut out all of the Cairo stuff, if we just went from getting the message about Jean-Yves being kidnapped and then ending up at the wherever it is we rescue him, or just like leading up to rescuing him, because I think it's sort of the last couple of Cairo levels that we rescue him. If they just cut that out, and honestly, if they put some of that into Chronicles, I probably would think a lot more positively about it, because it's not. I don't think the Cairo stuff is terribly good by Last Revelation standards, but it would be bloody amazing by Chronicles standards, wouldn't it? So the final game on the PlayStation 1 era is Tomb Raider Chronicles, and I actually really enjoyed this game going into it, because it's very somber, and I love a bit of somberness in storytelling. I don't know what that says about me, but the way it opens up with the memorial service and the statue and 2 people who are heavily implied to be Lara's parents, who've got the good decency to look miserable at their daughter's memorial service, and then of course you've got Winston, and you've got Father What's-His-Face, and you've got Baldy McBaldface, who's in absolutely no way Jean-Yves with a buzz cut and a goatee, because Jean-Yves was actually based on an actual person who's somewhat objected to being portrayed in a Tomb Raider game. I don't know why, dude, you're in a Tomb Raider game, come on! I really like this idea of it's 3 people sitting around talking about their friend, and like as I said with the Tomb Raider 3 stuff, one of the things I think Chronicles does really well is tying the different places together, because we're going to different locations, we're going to different points in Lara's timeline, and like for example the Rome stuff ends, then we come back into the present with Lara's friends, and then Baldy McBaldface starts talking about the Russian sub, and we get some stuff about the Russian sub, then we come back into the present again, and then we properly go back into the past with Lara, and I think that that's a much better way to do it. The irony of that is that Chronicles is basically just a bunch of rejected ideas from previous games that because they basically said they were in it for the money at this point. And so it is basically just a bunch of ideas that's shoved together into a game, and yet it feels more connected than Tomb Raider 3 did. Tomb Raider 3 that, the developers probably did really care about, and probably did really try to make it as good as they could make it. For me personally, Chronicles feels a bit more connected. The problem is that because it is just a bunch of rejected ideas shoved together, you can at times feel like that's really obvious. If you think about, I remember when I did my Let's Play of Chronicles a couple of years ago, I looked out at the image of the Colosseum and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And the image itself is kind of cool from the point of view of, a backdrop from 2000 on a PlayStation 1. But, as I thought about it afterwards, it's like, no, it's not, because we're just seeing this image of the Colosseum in the background. We never actually go into the Colosseum. The level is called the Colosseum, but we never actually get to go out and stand in the middle of the Colosseum like we did in the first game. And yeah, Granted, they probably couldn't make the Colosseum round. But at this point, it wasn't until Anniversary that we saw a round Colosseum in a Tomb Raider game. But they probably could have still made it look better than the one in Tomb Raider 1, and bigger and more grandiose. And yet, we just don't see any of that because it was a rushed production. It was just get it out there so that we can get some more sweet Tomb Raider money. Because, certainly during the first 4 games, if you were with Core Design, there was this kind of contractual agreement with IDOS that the individual developers would get some money from, get some of a cut of the royalties. So each of them were individually getting royalty checks that were sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds. And if you'd been with... by their own accounts, some of them just spent the money recklessly, but others saved. And if you were saving that much money over the course of 3-4 years, you'd be a millionaire by this point. So I mean, I can understand that idea of just want to put out another game to get some money. It's not a great reason for making a game, but it's understandable. That's the way. Or certainly, IDOS were really pushing because, Tomb Raider was the big thing that was making them a lot of money. But it really does feel like the game that's just shoved together. Because there's a lot of pacing issues in terms of, if you think about, the Rome section seems to be boss battle after boss battle after boss battle. And then, you get to the Russian sub and there's none of that at all. So it's this weird kind of disjointed thing of sometimes there's an abundance of something and then other times there's a dearth of it. Sometimes you get bits of levels that are actually quite inventive, and then other times it's just go over here and then go over there and then go over to this bit here. I would say that there is definitely some levels that are enjoyable to run around. There are some that are enjoyable that feel like perhaps they came at the earlier parts of the year, and then other parts of it feel rushed. I think the Russian stuff was just rammed together, with the exception of the deep sea dive stuff. Because that actually really surprised me when I did my Let's Play a couple of years ago, that the deep sea dive stuff actually actually plays pretty well, and maybe it's because you don't do a huge amount. It's not like a boat in Venice where you're having to do a time puzzle thingy. It is very basic in what you have to do in this thing, so maybe that helps. But certainly that was a lot more manoeuvrable. But a lot of the Russian stuff just feels like, you're running down another grey corridor, and then you're going to take a left into another grey corridor, and then you're going to go up to the right into another grey corridor. Very boring levels. So I would say that probably the better of the Chronicles levels. I mean, I do really like Rome, although I do also feel Chronicles has got that problem that really started with Tomb Raider 2, but it becomes really obvious in Chronicles is the end of one level is not in the same place that's the beginning of the next level. It does feel like, boom, suddenly we're in completely different locations. If you look at the end of Streets of Rome and the beginning of Trajan's Market, it's completely different locations. But yeah, the Rome stuff and the Ireland stuff, I think, and the Ireland stuff is, I mean, it's not Ireland. It's a hill with some grass on it. That's not Ireland. And your supernatural creepy weirdy thing is a Russian spirit. It's like, because as we all know, Ireland and Scotland and various parts of Britain do not have any mythology, and they don't have any histories, and they don't have any folklore and all that kind of stuff. So you have to go to Russia for, oh no, wait, I'm talking utter bullshit here. Britain has actually got a very rich, the various parts of Britain have very rich mythologies. They could have, but then again, maybe that's research, and they just didn't have the time for that because it was a rush game. So even the parts of Chronicles that I could praise, there's still that little caveat of, but it still has this problem that demonstrates the rushed nature of the production. So yeah, I mean, I would say, in terms of like sort of visuals and some of the stuff that you do, Rome and Ireland are the parts of it that I enjoy, and Russia is just the kind of it's just boring and dull and just very much the same. And they had this whole thing with the Russian admiral and the commander of the sub, and oh no, the commander of the sub's the admiral, and then there's some other beardy guy who is meant to be like a power struggle, but then that just kind of sort of disappears from the story almost as soon as it's introduced. Yeah, so and then of course there's the stuff at the end which I haven't talked about even in the least because I don't care. I mean, yes, it's modern stuff. Yes, there's one or two cool ideas, but oh my god, I just hate running around a tower block, and I hate that stupid gun that Lara has. So, Angel of Darkness. Do you know, I get it. I honestly do get it. Having played it again recently and been able to get into the story a bit more and reading the documents about all the, like they said, the extra sort of research and stuff that went into the creating of the story and the background of it, and like the history of the characters, and that history and certainly in the case of Eckhart's time stretches back to the 1300s. I get it. I get why people say they like this game. Of course, what they're actually saying when they say that is they like the potential that the game has. They like the game it could have been. There was a lot of problems behind the scenes, and I'm going to go into that in more detail in my review. Yeah, I remember when this game came out. This along with Prince of Persia was the first games I played on the PlayStation 2, and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is such a bloody brilliant game, and when you played Angel of Darkness next to that, you were just like, whoa, this is shit, and it really saddened me to have to come to that realization that Angel of Darkness was garbage, and the story as it's presented in game is often weak and a bit confusing, and I had so many negative reactions to it the first time I played. The gameplay is utterly horrendous. Utterly horrendous. There's no way you can defend the gameplay in this. And the thing is about 1 to 5 is that there is, yes, it's kind of weird that the world of Lara Croft is filled with right angles, but the thing is that it worked within the kind of game mechanics that they set up. The way Lara moved, the way she interacted with the environment, I mean, it worked. And like, if you take, for example, the jumping, you could do a standing jump forward or you could do a running jump, and you knew what the distance is in terms of blocks, in terms of the amount of space that was covered. So you could look at a gap and judge it accordingly. Now, there was one or two moments, I will grant you, that it kind of went a bit wrong. There's a run that you have to do to get one of the secrets in the first Egypt level in Tomb Raider 1, where you think it would be a running grab and actually you just do a running jump. There's the bit in one of the Nevada levels where you have to jump over the river, and again it looks like a running jump, and it's just a run that you do. I beg your pardon, a jump and grab, and it's just a jump that you do. There are little moments now and again, but for the most part it was reliable. And then here you've got you've got a jump, and then you've got the running jump. I would swear sometimes you end up jumping much further than you expect to. Then you've got the hop, and then you've got that sprinting jump thingy. So you've got 4 different jumps, and I struggled. If you watched my Let's Play, you would have seen times when I actually struggled to figure out what the distance was. And that's a weird thing for Tomb Raider to do. There's so much of this game hacked and slashed that it was just this constant feeling of confusion, like, the shop was meant to be so much more than it was, but they never finished it. So it's like, great, I can sell all this stuff, but only within a specific window. So if I don't, I'm going to spend the rest of the game running around with an antique flintlock in my back pocket. There's so many things in the game. The level up system. The I feel stronger, which is like, it's so dumb, the idea that, oh, I can't get this door open, okay, I'm going to kick this thing and now I'm strong enough. apparently was just the last step of a more complicated system, so they say. So, what you end up with is this game where I get. Okay, did I say this with one of the previous games? I can't remember. But I've said it in my Let's Plays in the past. The thing about core design is they always had good ideas. They just couldn't always implement them well. Whether that was, limitations of the technology at the time, or time constraints, or whatever it was, they they at times could not implement things as well as they could. Sometimes it would be slower and clunkier, or maybe just not as well thought out. There are plenty of things in Angel of Darkness that you see later on in games, like the level up system, like the notebook journal thingy, like optional dialogue, being able to choose how you take a conversation, but they are not implemented very well, so you end up doing all this stuff and it's just like, oh god, this is just, what is this? I cannot get over how boring the dialogue stuff is, because it is basically just watching two people stand in front of each other and talking. There's not really any action, there's not, it's not fair to judge a game by the standards of later games, but if you just think about where Tomb Raider is now, where two characters are talking but it's a very engaging scene, there's no reason why. I mean, even some of the early Crystal Dynamics games that came later, like conversations between two characters were usually dramatic, and there was usually something dramatic. Oh hell, you can even go backwards. And look at some of the conversations that she had, whether it was something like facing down Larson at the end of the Tomb of Qualpeg level, or whether she's sitting in a boat with Dr. Willard. There's just interesting little things going on, and in Angel of Darkness it's two people standing in front of each other talking, and that's all that's happening, and that is boring. And that is ultimately the problem with Angel of Darkness. Is it had so much great ideas, there was so much interesting stuff in the ideas in the story, and the background of the characters, and the background of the all the extra stuff that was going on around the story, and what you end up with on screen is something that is boring, confusing, and rubbish to play. But I will emphasize again, I get it. I get it now in a way that I didn't in the past, and certainly didn't 10 years ago when I made those old videos. I get why people like it. I get why they like the game it could have been. But the actual game as it was is just, what a disappointment. And apparently it was a mere 2 weeks between the game being released, forced out. I mean, there was mismanagement at core. They didn't know how to manage a big team, something like 40 people, whereas they'd been used to somewhere like between 6 people made the first game, and I think it was up to about 15 by the time they got to Last Revelation. But they didn't know how to manage bigger teams, and then IDOS were like, look, we need our Tomb Raider money, so you're releasing that. So, there were a lot of problems. Perhaps Angel of Darkness was doomed from the beginning. But, 2 weeks between it being released and then IDOS saying, okay, we're taking the game away from you. And the sad thing is the people at core were like, alright, they if you spend like 5 years, well, no, wait a minute, it would have been more like, 6-7 years, working on a game series, and that consumes so much of your time. You don't have the time to be inventive. The first Tomb Raider was very inventive. There's a lot of nice things in the later games, but does it show the same level of creative thinking or ingenuity? Do the later PlayStation 1 era games bring anything new to the table that's a game changer the way that first game was a game changer? Not really. And that's the problem, is because they were being forced by IDOS to put out game after game after game. There was no room for creative ideas. There was no room to work on other games, or not as much room. So they were actually not that fussed to see the back of Lara, because they were like, great, we can do something else now. And that's really sad, isn't it? It's sad that that's where they ended up with with Tomb Raider and with Lara Croft, they weren't sad to see the back of her. And you know, you do have to wonder. I mean, the most recent game was partly made by Crystal Dynamics, partly made by Eidos Montreal. I don't know if Crystal Dynamics, like, I'm not really somebody who follows a lot of news when it comes to games these days. I'm kind of like, oh, new game, cool, awesome, cool. I don't know what the future is, plans are for Tomb Raider, but I suspect that when the next game is going to be announced, it's not going to be Crystal Dynamics that are doing it, because, you know, that'll be them since 2003, 4-ish. Been working on Tomb Raider. You know, if you look at their Wikipedia page, it just, you know, from Tomb Raider 4 it just says, I beg pardon, from 2004 it just says Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider, Tomb Raider. I wonder if they are getting to the point where they're, you know, not sorry to see the back of Lara, you know, and it gets handed off to somebody else. It's kind of sad, but I guess that's the industry. So yeah, that's the core design games. So in the next video, I'll have a wee ramble about the Crystal Dynamics games.
Left Larson sucking wind then, eh?
If that is the phrase.
Well, your little vacation riot's over now. Time to give back what you've hijacked off me.
Let's try the lunchbox.